Imagine, if you will, those 3 a.m. thoughts about time, space, or the odd and unusual things. These are not your everyday topics. These curiosities about the world and us seem more fiction than fact. This is a journey of enlightenment on subjects that fascinate the mind. Our findings may not change your views or beliefs, but let us share what we have researched along the way. Buckle up as we show you what we've discovered down the rabbit hole. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What If Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm Will.
I'm Terry.
So hopefully you've listened to our last podcast where we talked about the human origin. Mm-hmm. We're back with part 2 of the human origin. Like we said at the end of the last episode, that we really just hit the tip of the iceberg on this. Mm-hmm. And we felt like we'd be doing you a disservice if we didn't continue on and really get out all of the information that we wanted to cover.
Right. That was something that I felt like after we were done, it was kind of like I just kind of walked away from it, and I remember saying to you, I feel like there's more that needs to be said, whether or not that's the case.
I mean, we did cover a lot in the last video.
We did.
So if you haven't actually watched the first part of this, we strongly urge you to go back and watch that one first.
Yes.
Because this will make a whole lot more sense if you watch the first one.
Well, yeah.
For those of you who did watch the first one and are returning for this one, just a quick recap, things that we covered in that first one. We covered the stories or the theories, if you will, of the major Western religions in how it relates to the human origin. Right, the beginning of humans, so to speak. We talked about the current evolutionary narrative.
Correct.
We went through the timeline as far as evolution is concerned, right. Where civilization started and the various years. Mm-hmm. We talked about recent discoveries that are actually predating ancient Sumeria,
right.
That was supposed to be where, evolutionary-wise,
right.
where the modern human began. We talked about oops, or out-of-place artifacts.
Yes. That's that right there, to me, is one of the big smoking guns.
Sure.
Other than the genetic
100%.
Yeah.
And then that's where... I feel like we started to fall short, mm-hmm. in that we got into the new evidence, the new science, mm-hmm. Talking about how the theory of evolution as it's being taught today is mm-hmm. not necessarily correct as far mm-hmm. as the human evolution goes.
As it pertains to anatomically modern humans, it doesn't line up. Correct.
We talked about when the anatomically modern human came into existence. And then we got into essentially what defines the anatomically modern human, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In
that the chromosome modifications.
Right. Chromosome number 2 and 7.
We really kind of ended off with what was it? Chromosome number 7?
Number 7, yeah.
Right. And what that does and how it was modified and that sort of thing.
Right.
So why don't we pick up there?
Okay. As it pertains to chromosome number 7, the one thing I realized that I did not mention, that I kind of wanted to mention, was that, and once again, we'll call this Terry's woo moment. We have these on this podcast where I kind of... We mentioned that chromosome number 7 gave us a very vivid imagination. It gave us empathy. It gave us compassion. It also gave us the ability to visualize, to see things in our mind's eye. And that modification did that, I should say. And the interesting thing to me is that a lot of people in the spiritual community, you know, everybody talks about things like the law of attraction, the law of assumption, the Hermetic principles, which I think we're going to do a video on the Hermetic principles, even if
let us know in the comments if you want to know more about the Hermetic principles. I feel like we're going to do it anyway, but it'd be nice to know, you know, if some of our fans are just as interested.
But the first Hermetic principle is one of mentalism. And what is it that all these things teach? They teach that your thoughts are energy, your thoughts are things, and you can manifest them into 3D solid reality. And it's interesting to me that someone or something or however the modifications occurred, obviously we could all debate that for 20 years probably, and probably will.
For sure.
But it's interesting to me that the gift of the vivid imagination, the gift of visualization, would serve us, not just because we can invent stuff like computers and cars and airplanes and whatnot, but it would serve us in the fact that if those theories were correct and your imagination, like Neville Goddard always said, imagination is God. Your imagination is God, is the Christ within you. That's how you create reality. Albert Einstein even said the human imagination is the mind of God. When you have an imagination that you can use to create, whether it's create something in the 3D reality or create reality itself, that to me is a very interesting thing. Like, you would modify a person's genetics to have a more vivid imagination. It's almost a smoking gun if you're into a lot of spiritual topics like I am. It's almost like that was a gift given to us to create reality or to create things, and yet somehow throughout the last 200,000 years, that information got lost, suppressed, whatever.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. That's the one thing that I failed to mention in the last video that I kind of wanted to bring up.
I feel like for our super religious fans, mm-hmm. or even semi-religious fans of the Western religions, they're definitely glad to hear that, because mm-hmm. it lends a lot of weight to intelligent design.
Sure.
Right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's not something that randomly happens.
Right. It's
right?
not.
But at the same time, as far as intelligent design goes, like, somebody definitely thought, okay, this is how we can manipulate these beings on a genetic level mm-hmm. to give them this ability. And I just had my thought just left. It's gone.
No, I get where you're going with it. It's to give somebody the ability to have this extra. I don't know if is it proper to call it extra sensory, because it's not really sensory, but to have an extra ability to create and manipulate one's own reality, one's own world and space, right. through the processes of thought and emotion. Neville Goddard talked about it. Napoleon Hill talked about it. The list of gurus that talk about it today are as long as you can imagine. But it's fascinating to me that this genetic evidence almost aligns with what these people are saying. You know what I mean? That's sure, something interesting.
Sure. I kind of remember my thought now.
Okay, cool.
So as far as intelligent design goes, is clearly, not a random thing that we were given this ability.
Right.
Right? But at the same time, we have free will to do as we see fit, so to speak. So, not that we're not intelligently designed, because clearly we are, but I wonder how much thought was put into our design.
And once again, I'm not going to go down the multiple rabbit holes of
that certainly would be a deep rabbit hole.
Right. Because there's a lot of stories out there. There's a lot of theories. There's a lot of stuff written in ancient texts and stuff that talk
sure.
about that. And I'm like, but it's interesting that a lot of it comes back to when you get out of, as you say, the modern religions. When you go further back, when you go back into the ancient texts, when you look at people, everything from First Nations people and what they have, Aboriginals in Australia.
Sure.
In the Middle East, we have the ancient Essenes, and we have different cultures, ancient cultures from all over the world, and that predate modern religion. And they basically say, they all have sort of an origin story that the human being was a creation of sorts. The modern human was a creation of sorts, whether it be gods or what we would call today aliens or something like that.
Right.
Basically an outside intelligence that comes to this planet and plants the seeds of anatomical modern humans as we know it, and sort of gives them a little push and hand when they need it.
Sure.
But in the same token, also wants them to kind of figure things out for themselves too. But let's avoid the big pitfalls. We're not looking for a mass extinction event here.
Right.
But we're doing that. And that's interesting to me because, like I said, it aligns with the modern theories and science that's out there, the not so well-known narrative. And it also aligns with the ancient texts.
Right.
The people that, lived thousands and thousands of years ago, that's fascinating to me.
I think we're going to definitely do an episode on some of those stories, if you will, and those texts.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
I feel like the previous episode and this episode is more about trying to get down to where did we actually come from. Right. The before times, if you will.
Yeah. And just full disclosure, we didn't solve it.
No. We just have some interesting information that we're providing you that does go back a long time.
Right.
But
very long.
Currently, spoiler alert, there is no definitive answer to say where we actually came from.
Right.
There is a lot of information out there that just, I'll say it's interesting, and we'll go through it because I don't want to summarize in the middle of this.
No. And like you said, there's a lot of synchronicity. That's a word that spiritual people use, a word I use a lot. And as Carl Jung, famous psychotherapist, defined, he was the one who coined the term synchronicity. It's called synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence. And there's a lot of meaningful coincidences.
Truth.
In, anybody with any kind of perception can see if they look into it. I mean, there's a lot of things that link together that make sense and stuff. So
indeed,
it's fascinating. To touch on, you brought up intelligent design. To touch on that, I found something interesting too. This I kind of stumbled across almost accidentally.
Okay.
You're in the first video, I believe you brought up the fact that intelligent design, creationism, talked about the Earth being about 6,000 years old, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Well, the math essentially works out to humans, specifically, I'll call them Adamites, meaning descendants of Adam in the Judeo-Christian religion. Essentially, it works out that Adam was created 6,000 years ago.
I shouldn't have said world. I should have said humans. Yeah.
There's a lot of interpretation in the major Western religions. So the world, based on those religious views, could be older, could be, 6,000 years and 6 days. A lot of interpretation there.
Yeah, I kind of misspoke. I apologize for that. I said world. What I should have meant was humanity. But I found an interesting fact. Now, Caucasians, which we are, you and I, Caucasians are, even science will tell you, Caucasians are the newest arrival in the anatomical modern human. We are not very old as comparison to, say, Africans, who are probably the original Homo sapiens. All evidence points to that, and there's different genetic variations all over it. But we're called Caucasians, for those of you who don't know, is because we believe that the species, at least science believes, that the species originated in the Caucasus Mountains in Russia, which border Turkey, Afghanistan, the Middle East. And it's interesting because Billy Carson from MIT. Those of you who watch Gaia might know who he is. He's a very smart guy.
He's a professional researcher, basically.
Yeah, pretty much it. And he's got a lot of great information on a lot of topics. Actually,
so much content. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and he with his research has said that there is no physical, archaeological, or even any kind of textual, like any kind of thing written down or, cave drawings or whatever, to prove that Caucasians have been here longer than 6,000 years. Which is interesting to me because when you talk about intelligent design and creationism and, like you said, the Adam and Eve story,
right?
That's 6,000 years. So is this story really I'm not trying to get racial here, folks, but is it really just because Caucasians have been here 6,000 years?
So, what if I told you that we'll call it Judeo-Christian story of the Garden of Eden specifically was more true than false? And what if I told you that Caucasians, and I would like to point out the area that he's talking about, the Caucasus Mountains, it's not just white people.
No.
Like there are tan people there as well.
Yes.
Also referred to as Caucasians. But that general vicinity is actually where the Garden of Eden would have been, I would say would have been based on ancient Sumerian texts.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
I don't remember the gentleman's name. I should have wrote it down. But he combed through every ancient Sumerian text that we have and compared it to a number of different what are called base languages. So Sanskrit, ancient Hebrew, they're all very similar. Right, in the way they're formatted and the way they translate. And according to his translations of ancient Sumerian texts, the Garden of Eden would have been located on a mountain in that general area that is called, wait, I actually have it written down here on purpose. It is called Kardog.
Yes. Okay. I do. Yeah.
And I have some more information to get in that. But anyway, that is essentially where the Garden of Eden would have been located. It also is like where the start of both the Euphrates and the Tigris River.
Right.
That's where they both start. So it would make sense.
Right.
That everything, because it's very lush, very green, very, like, all of the water is available there. But according to ancient Sumerian text, and this is where I think the 6,000 year math does kind of work out. Ancient Sumerian texts say that the Anunnaki, specifically two brothers, basically created anatomically modern humans to be their gardeners, more or less.
Right.
And the translation, what we think in the Judeo-Christian faith of the Garden of Eden is everything was given to us and we didn't have to want for anything. The specific translation from ancient Sumerian text really boils down to it's a life of servitude. Everything was not given to us. We were created to essentially farm for the Anunnaki.
I was going to go there too. A lot of research that I've done over the years. There's a lot of, now granted, you have a lot of archaeological and scientific merit to what you're saying and historical also. The reason why I didn't bring any of this up is because I didn't do my due diligence on that front. But over the years, I've heard so many stories that we are a slave race, that we were created for servitude.
I'm going to say yes and no to that. As we are now, I won't say I believe it because I'm not 100% sure. There's a lot of information, and I'm just trying to put it all in the correct timeline.
Right.
So I definitely wouldn't say that, you or I, as we sit here, are a descendant of a slave race. But I would say that there's certainly a lot of evidence that points to a slave race of modern anatomically, however we're pronouncing that now, anatomically modern humans.
Yeah.
Were created, I think, roughly 6,000 years ago by what actually Billy says, by a race of extraterrestrials.
Yes.
And there's honestly some pretty compelling evidence that those were not the first ones that they manipulated.
Definitely not. Billy also speaks of a African tribe, which, like I said, that would make sense because the first anatomically correct humans would have been Africans. The DNA just it's older. Oh, geez, I'm trying to remember the name of the tribe, but it goes back over 10,000 years ago. And these stories, a similar creationist story about how these star people came here and created these this tribe and created and gave them gifts, gave them the gift of fire, gave them the gift of knowledge on how to do certain things and master certain things, and would as they got more prolific with it, they would a little bit more would be given to them, a little more information, and it's the Dogon. That's what they were called.
Okay.
That's the name of the tribe. Sorry, brain fart. And it's really interesting that all these ancient. I mean, I have yet to come across ancient texts that don't mention, even in Judeo-Christian ethics. On my Bigfoot, in the Bigfoot video we had done when we were talking about my experience, I had mentioned that Scott Carpenter, who's a researcher in Tennessee, believes that Bigfoot could be the descendant of the Nephilim. Now, what the Nephilim are in the Judeo-Christian traditions are offspring between the fallen angels and human women. However, if you were to watch the show Ancient Aliens, and you go by the von Däniken theory, Nephilim are descendants of extraterrestrials and human females. Because in his mind, primitive people, Bronze Age people would see, these supreme beings coming down from the sky as gods or angels or supreme beings of some kind, and not that they were just, extraterrestrials or, technologically superior than what we were at that time. So, it depends upon where you want to fall on the fence. It's all interesting information to me. I don't, if you say to me, whatever, I'm not saying I subscribe to anything 100%, but I do lean to the fact that, well, it's pretty much a peer-reviewed scientific fact at this point that our genes were messed with. And because the odds of it happening naturally are pretty much impossible. Right. And when you understand that has happened, the only question in your mind should be who and how. And that's where I'm coming from with it. I won't speak for you. I'll speak, but that's where I'm coming from with it. So yeah, extraterrestrials are a fascinating subject to me, and their role perhaps in our history and in who we are today could very well be very important. So that's where I sit with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I'm going to use that as a jumping off point to for those who may or may not have watched our first video and just decide that since they're here, they're going to watch this one. So let's talk about real quick the so there's a archaeological site, okay, that is, let me make sure I'm on the right page. Okay. Oh, it's always good to have notes or I'll forget to say something.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So it's in between India and Pakistan. And it is called, I'm probably going to butcher this, but I believe it's pronounced Mohenjo-Daro.
Okay.
which I'm sure I butchered that.
It's close, I think.
So they dated it back to about 5,000 years or so, which does kind of fit the current narrative as far as where civilization started.
Right.
Except for this civilization they found was technologically advanced.
Right.
In that they had knowledge of architecture, mathematics, they had indoor plumbing.
Yes.
Hot and cold running water. They had flush toilets. They had stained glass windows. And I thought this was really interesting because when they started to uncover this particular site, the city, if you will, they noted they did find a lot of skeletons, as archaeologists tend to do, but they found them all at one end of the city.
Yeah.
And the bodies themselves are described as all being in flight. So they were trying to get away from something. Some of them looked like they were trying to run, get away, and they collapsed. Some of them were huddled together, like embracing each other, all that sort of thing. And Greg Braden, who we talk about a lot,
Yes. Big fans.
he says a lot that if you just look at the evidence itself, it'll tell you a small piece of what may or may not happened. But if you go to the context of what actually what was going on, or the stories, if you will, of that era and that area, two different words there, era and area.
Yes.
Then it begins to paint a bigger picture. And so while they were, uncovering the site, they decided they would measure the radiation. And they found that every body they found has a super high radiation from them, like way more than what would be absorbed from just being covered up in the earth.
Right.
For those of you who don't know, the earth has radiation. Bodies absorb that.
Yes.
It's a thing. But these are still, I would say, they're still hot, so to speak. So that doesn't really paint a big picture. However, they went to the texts, the ancient texts of that area, and believed to be written at that time. And in the area of India, right, they went to the ancient text of the Hindu. Oh my gosh, I know I'm going to butcher this one. It's Mahabharata, and specifically a small portion of it that is the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
And so in here, this is a story essentially in the in this small section of the Hindu text.
Yes.
There's a story about two tribes that were at war. And the one began to lose. And so they decided to use this weapon that had never been used before. And I actually wrote this down so I could quote it word for word. Translated, obviously. So take it with a grain of salt. There's always room for interpretation in translations as well sometimes.
Yes.
But it is said that a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 1,000 suns, rose in all its splendor. A perpendicular explosion with its billowing smoke clouds, the clouds of smoke rising after its first explosion, formed into an expanding round circles like the opening of giant parasols.
That's, well, I think we all know what that sounds like, right?
It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced to ashes the entire race of the Vrishnis and the Ankas. I believe I mispronounced that. But you can read it for yourself on the internet somewhere, I'm sure.
Obviously, that sounds like a mushroom cloud and a nuclear device.
100%.
Now, here's the thing that also gives it away for me when you said it had the power of the universe. And we all know the universe is made up of atoms and subatomic particles. And how does nuclear weapons work? Well, we split the atom.
Yep.
For that to happen. And that to me is, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, and I've actually heard that story before, which is fascinating. And you know what? I always lend credence to everything because, I mean, not everything obviously, but I mean when it comes to the ancient texts, because when you hear something that was written thousands of years ago, and you can have a mental picture of it because you've seen it in modern times, that's amazing. That's almost a personal confirmation in a sense.
So Robert Oppenheimer, the father of modern nuclear technology,
right?
He was interviewed at Rochester University after they tested the first atom bomb.
Right.
And one of the students who was interviewing him asked him, how do you feel now that you've, basically created the first atom bomb? And he says, well, not the first. The first modern atomic bomb. And actually, this is sort of a speculation, I suppose, because there are a bunch of people there, obviously, when they tested this atom bomb. But it is said that when they watched the mushroom cloud rise, Oppenheimer could be heard saying, I have become death, destroyer of worlds, which is actually a quote specifically from the small section of the Hindu text, in which the many-armed god, that I don't remember his name all of a sudden.
Is it Vishnu?
Vishnu.
Yes.
Had essentially, he was attempting to get the leader of the tribe who used the atomic weapon to, save his people by using this.
Yeah.
And so the story goes that to impress the leader, who was a prince, he took his many-armed form and he said, I have become death, destroyer of worlds. Yeah. Direct quote. So I feel like, one, the context, kind of looking at the evidence, the context of that time, even though it's essentially a word of mouth, so to speak, stories, if you will, kind of lends, it makes the evidence make sense. And vice versa, the evidence makes the stories, as you would think of them, seem more plausible.
And, I mean, it's like I said, when I hear that and I hear what Oppenheimer said in comparison to what was said then, and of course the description, which, I mean, it's pretty accurate. I mean, like, as you were speaking and you were reading, I mean, the picture in my head was totally things I've seen in documentaries and TV about, the mushroom cloud and what have. It's unbelievably fascinating, but it's so disheartening that we just keep making the same mistakes over and over again. It's.
Let me add another nail in the coffin, so to speak, to that story. This is actually a recent development. So Google Earth, everybody's familiar with Google Earth at this point, right?
I think so. Yeah.
In that particular area, right, very close to that archaeological site, Google Earth took a picture of a crater. And when scientists saw this, they're like, probably an asteroid, a meteor of some kind, right? So obviously, archaeologists were like, is it though? And so they went and they excavated this crater, like the base of the crater, and found zero evidence of an impact of that magnitude.
Right.
Because obviously we know what the Earth would look like if a meteor had impacted it, because we've looked at these before. Scientists, I should say, not us.
Yes.
But essentially looking at this crater that is in the general area where it would make sense for an ancient civilization described in the Hindu text to detonate an atomic bomb, it lends a lot of weight to say that this story is not. I feel like it extends past plausible into the realm of truth.
I would agree, and you know, it's like I said, to me, when as you read that, it's kind of disheartening, but it also kind of goes back to, once again, if you watch the first video, the part one of this, I had mentioned that this is my feeling about it. If we've been here 200,000 years, which we have, according to science as of right now, and we have not changed, which is the odd thing. Not only have we been here that long, but we haven't changed.
Right.
We're the same brain, same everything. And, you know, the modern narrative would have us believe that we haven't done anything for the first 194,000 years. And then 6,000 years ago, we finally got our shit together and went, okay, well, now we're going to start writing stuff down. We're going to start irrigating crops. We're going to start, you know, building houses and homesteads and communities and blah, 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 whatever. And to me, it's texts like this that have always raised a flag to me that narrative can't be correct, because we are too ambitious of a creature to sit around and just like for 194. And now the archaeological evidence, physical evidence, genetic evidence is all backing up that claim. It's all saying, hey, listen, the truth is that we've tried, you know, this might be, I heard an investigator at one time who his name escapes me, so I won't, say that they believe, and this is just a belief, there's this, you know, there's evidence, but no concrete anything, that our civilization that exists today, right now, may be the second or third try at civilization for humans, for anatomically modern humans, because we just keep screwing it up with stuff like this. You know what I mean? We keep having to hit the reset button. And because it was such a catastrophic thing, we want to kind of erase it from our collective memory as a culture. You know, we don't want to know that we're infamously popular for destroying our way of life and our planets and our cultures and our people. It's very disheartening, but to me, there's also an enlightening aspect of it, because we don't have to be dumb, folks. We don't have to be idiots. We could read this, and whether you choose to believe that this is just a tale of moralities or a cautionary tale or whatever like that is fine. But if you want to take it literal too, either way, Steven Spielberg once famously said, the best sci-fi is always the cautionary tales. And I agree with that. And if you want to call this sci-fi and call it entertainment, and take it, but take it as a cautionary tale nonetheless, that we need to understand that we have this, for all our wonderful abilities that we're capable of, this wonderful brain, this wonderful imagination, this wonderful all that, we don't often use, whenever we do something, it's kind of like, I watched a documentary the one time, and they believe that the bow and arrow, which has been around our culture for thousands and thousands of years, probably tens of thousands of years, was originally designed to be a musical instrument by ancient peoples. And
I could see that.
Like a multiple stringed instrument. And then somebody went, well, wait a minute, I could use this to kill shit with.
Yeah.
And it went from an instrument of creation and an instrument of expression to an instrument of destruction. And
I mean, just an
innovative thing.
Just the written history that you're taught in elementary school, or, you know, for those who have it, a middle school, shows clearly that every great society, every great civilization eventually destroys themselves.
Sure.
I don't know about a third iteration, but I have compelling evidence and truly believe we are at least the second iteration.
I would definitely say that. I feel that way. But that's me. That's my opinion.
Well, let's take a step back from the Hindu area, where, they may have set off a chain of events that destroyed us all. Don't really know. But here's the evidence that I found. We're definitely the second iteration.
Okay.
So I know we talked about this in the first episode, Göbekli Tepe.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to say again here. So they started excavating that in 1996. The archaeologist is Dr. Klaus Schmidt. They believe that Göbekli Tepe, not specifically Göbekli Tepe, but near Göbekli Tepe, is the earliest evidence of agriculture, stemming back 11,600 years. And the fun fact is actually how they got to that conclusion. And it was a researcher, not a researcher, an expert on cereal, like breakfast cereal, who went looking for the first grain. And so he had read, remember, we had talked about how the one particular gentleman whose name escapes me did the translation of the Sumerian text that put the Garden of Eden in the mountains outside of Turkey. And so that's kind of where he went, right?
Right.
And so he found this particular grain that is called einkorn. And they did like a bunch of tests on it. And they discovered that this is the first cultivated grain. It does not exist in the wild. It is literally genetically modified, like GMO.
Well, I was going to say
like
the world's
today's
first
GMO, genetically modified grain. Like to the point that it has barely similarities to, in that area, wild grasses and wild grains. So they pinpoint this grain to come into existence roughly 10,000 years ago. And I thought that was super interesting that there's an ancient text that says, hey, there were people in this general area that were created to farm food for extraterrestrials or gods, either way,
Yeah.
depending. And then the main grain in that area doesn't exist in the wild.
Yeah.
But
like I said, it's a meaningful coincidence, isn't it? It lines up.
I'm quickly not going to stop believing coincidences. I feel like there are too many coincidences for coincidences to actually exist.
Call me crazy. The older I get, the more I believe there are no coincidences. I really do, and that's once again my opinion. I mean, look, everybody's got their own feeling about it. That's fine. I believe that especially the older I get, there are no coincidences, really. Truth. I mean, all this seems to be connected together. It's kind of like not to get off this topic, but if I may just deviate for one moment.
By all means.
The simulation theory that's gaining traction on the internet and in our culture now. The interesting thing to me about the simulation theory is I don't want to mention his name. Everybody knows who he is, but there's a certain billionaire, very popular mogul right now that is buying
everything
social media platforms and going in outer space. I've said too much already, but a few years back, this person decided that he had he really wanted to try to get more concrete evidence about this simulation theory that a lot of intelligent scientists believe is a true thing.
Sure.
And he had, I believe it was MIT, I might be wrong, but he had a very accredited university with a very good probability and statistics staff. The reason why I say MIT is because they're kind of world renowned for having one of the best prob stats. These are the people that went to Vegas and beat Vegas.
Right.
Very, very bright, good probability statistics. And they basically, he paid a lot of money to these people to try to find what is the percentage of that this is a simulation we live in. And they did they created algorithms, they did all this stuff, they plugged in
all of the math.
Right. All the math that could be. And it came back that it is most likely that it is like in the 88% probability that this is in fact a simulation. And one of the reasons, the biggest driving factor for that finding is lack of randomness. They couldn't find a lot of randomness. And the whole idea behind evolution and the current scientific narrative is that everything is random. Everything is separate. Everything happens, that humanity, the planet Earth, our solar system, the universe is just one big cosmic accident. Not the case. Not the case here. I wanted to interject that little factoid because that is also confirmation to myself that coincidences aren't necessarily a thing, or I don't really believe in them anymore on a personal level either.
I agree, 100%.
Mm-hmm. Sorry for the deviation on that.
So this is actually going back to Göbekli Tepe. Mm-hmm. This is where I feel like we are definitely at least on our second iteration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Specifically because all of the scientists and researchers that have been studying this particular area and everything that has stemmed from it, believe that this is where agriculture as we know it today began, right? And it really just looks, with the information they have, the context kind of looks like the people that settled in this area just woke up one day and knew how to farm.
Yeah.
Before that, all evidence points to humanity as we know it being hunter-gatherers, with zero evidence pointing to an evolutionary step of trying to grow their own food.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right? Everything up until this point, everything was, well, this is already here, and I didn't die when I ate it, so I'm going to eat this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, once again,
they're calling it, if I may, sorry to
interrupt. No, go ahead.
They're calling this the re-civilization,
mm-hmm.
not the start, but the re-civilization.
Yeah,
because Robert Schoch, who's a PhD and a professor of natural science at Boston University. He has done the math and the research and believes that roughly 12,800 years ago, there was a huge cataclysm that essentially snapped us out of the last ice age. Mm-hmm. Okay. And he believes that there were essentially solar outbursts, kind of like solar flares, but to the extreme. Mm-hmm. So much that the flare practically reached into the Earth's atmosphere. So that caused like the temperature to rise. It caused a lot of earthquakes. It caused a lot of volcanic eruptions. It may or may not have actually caused the continents to shift. Mm-hmm. But being in that last ice age, literally all of the major Western religions talk about a great flood.
Yeah.
And you get that amount of ice melting that fast, mm-hmm. there's going to be a flood.
Oh, sure. The sea levels would rise exponentially. Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so that may have wiped out possibly the first rendition, or what I'm based on this evidence, I'm calling the first rendition of anatomically modern humans. Mm-hmm. Not all of them.
No.
Because to have a re-civilization, you got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like they...
and yeah, it's just making me think, I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's making me think, I mean, how many of we know it as being raised in the Judeo-Christian ethic of the story of Noah, who got his family, God told him there was going to be a flood, he built the ark, got 2 of every animal, put them on the ark, and... but that predates. There were stories similar to that.
Sure.
Many millennia older than that. Like I believe there's even a story in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the same, a similar, God destroys the earth with water stories.
Right. And it's always for a reason, and essentially that reason is always to wipe out or erase the I will call the previous rendition, the mistakes, if you will.
The wicked.
Yeah, the wicked.
Mm-hmm. That's the, yeah, that's that. Like I said, all these things are lining up to me.
Sure.
Coincidences are out the window at this point. And from my perspective, there's too many things that line up. There's too many stories that are similar or that coincide, or that it's just too much. There's too much evidence to ignore. It's funny because I believe in the last episode, we discussed a little bit about my Bigfoot episode as well, but it kind of goes back to what I said in that. The reason when so many people have the same account, it can't, in my mind, you cannot, when you have physical, genetic, historical, oral, all of these different components of the story.
Sure.
I can't see how anybody could see that and see that it's false altogether. I can't. There
agree.
has to be something there.
I agree.
And that was a point I made then. That's a point I think that's a hill I'll probably die on. And I feel that way. I really do. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, not a problem. Let me take you back further.
Okay.
Past the 12,000 before the Great Cataclysm.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually, I will say, a fairly recent. So within the last 10 years, discovery in the ice, under the ice in Antarctica. They have discovered through satellite photos, and from what I understand, you can, like if you're an astronaut, you can actually see these things in space. Because of global warming, the ice in Antarctica is becoming very thin. And so they've discovered not only, or I guess what made them look was there is a void that is twice the size of the Grand Canyon, a valley, if you will, right? And so they're like, wow, that's weird. And they started looking, and they found more, I'll call them civilizations, ancient civilizations that are not on the ice like, like whalers and that sort of thing, but these are beneath the ice, miles beneath the ice. And it's, we're not at the point where we can start excavating this yet. I mean, I guess we could if we found archaeologists who are willing to spend the money and go freeze while they're digging through all this ice.
And but it's not an easy place to get to either.
Scientists, it's really throwing the scientists for a loop, because Antarctica is made up of multiple sheets of ice.
Yes.
The most recent ice sheet in Antarctica predates 20,000 years ago, right? And for a community that believes that, we have only existed for 6,000 years or even 10,000 years.
Sure.
These archaeological sites exist below the 20,000 year mark.
Right. There's examples of that all over the world.
Who was around, 20,000 years ago? And furthermore, who goes to the frigid area to build these civilizations?
Well, then once again, it goes back to this. Nobody really does that. Nobody says, I'm going to start a civilization where I can't grow crops and I can't raise livestock and I can't, have, they don't do that. Through the theory of plate tectonics, now I don't know what the modern take on this is. I'm going by what I learned when I was at school 7,000 years ago.
Right.
My experience was Antarctica was once part of what is modern day Australia and New Zealand, and broke off and ended up down there. And that's when it got cold, because it's at a pole. It's South Pole, North Pole and South Pole. There's ice at both places. Now, I would think that civilization was probably constructed when it was part of the Australian continent.
So, Billy, remind me of his last
Carson.
name. Billy Carson has a pretty good, I don't know if you want to call it a working theory. He probably has documented evidence somewhere to back this up, because he is a professional researcher.
It's his ding. Yeah.
I actually watched a video where he talks about Antarctica used to be a tropical island. and was the focal point, the beginning of what are referred to as pre-Adamites. And by pre-Adamites, we're going based off of the Judeo-Christian Adam and Eve
Right,
kind of version
right.
there, right? And so, most likely, these civilizations were built when it was a tropical island, right? And they existed right up to the Great Cataclysm, which is probably what actually caused the shifting of this thing to be in the South Pole.
Right.
Although the Ice Age could have done that too, or even before that.
Right.
But interestingly enough, and here's where we're going back to that first rendition. Where did we come from? And extraterrestrials keep popping up,
Sure.
right? And so there's a running school of thought that the Anunnaki talked about in the ancient Sumerian text. I will say helped to start the anatomically modern human, in that they found in Peru and across all of the continents anatomically modern humans, with a caveat that they had elongated skulls,
Yeah.
like to match the descriptions of the Anunnaki. And I will say your mainstream scientists are right there with like, oh, well, tribes have been doing that for years, right? With binding their children's
Yeah.
skulls and all that. However, when you look at the tribes that do that, there's always a flat spot in the front and the back of the skull. And you can elongate the skull itself, but you can't increase the volume of the void in your skull.
No.
And these elongated skulls that they found in Peru, they found them in Iraq, they've literally found them on all 7 continents.
Right.
Not only are the skulls elongated, but the volume of the void is almost twice what the current anatomically modern human has.
Right.
So here again, now we're back to, we may very well be at least the second rendition of the anatomically modern human.
And not only that, but this goes, but this example I'm about to use can be used in not just in this story, but in a lot of stories. How is it that, for example, these people with these elongated skulls, there's evidence of it on this continent, on continents across the ocean. These people would have never, according to modern science, would have never known each other, would have never mingled, would have never shared thoughts or ideas or anything like that. But yet their cultures and their practices are remarkably similar, if not exactly the same.
Sure.
Same thing with pyramids. Egypt had pyramids, but we find them in South America too. There's a pyramid recently, within the last few years, they discovered in the Czech Republic. That's, by the way, 15,000 years old. It predates Mesopotamia by almost 10,000 years.
I want to get off on a tangent since you brought up pyramids.
Okay.
So I don't want to call it a new discovery, but I will say it's a working theory that they have very good evidence of, in that ancient Sumerians? Let me double check that and get back to you on who specifically. But either way, they had done a study that pyramids are designed to manipulate energy for, and amongst other things, health benefits. It's one of and they manipulate the Earth's energy.
Right.
The working title of this is pyramid energy.
Yeah, I've heard pyramid power and stuff. Yeah,
Right.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
So one of the things they did, and they said, if you are around pyramid energy, generally you are healthier. Generally, your mood is better. Generally, you heal faster. And one of the things they did to prove this is they took granite from one of the pyramids, and they put it in a cell with convicted, like I'm talking lifers, right? And they noticed when they put this convict with this slab from a pyramid, they were much nicer. They did not have the standard stereotypical convict outbursts and what have you.
Right.
Just in general, they were overall a better person.
Right. Did you ever see the episode of Mythbusters on pyramid power?
I did not.
I'm going off on a tangent, but I'll only be for a second.
We're not affiliated with Mythbusters.
Mythbusters
or the Discovery
was a
Channel.
show that me and my wife, but like 10, 15 years ago, it was on the Discovery Channel. We were just huge fans of it. But they did an episode on pyramid power, and what they did was they actually, on that theory, they constructed like pyramid, just taking pieces of metal, they constructed and welded like these small pyramids. And the theory is that the power of the pyramid would do all these different things. And one of the experiments they did was they took a vegetable. I can't remember what one it was. Might have been a potato or something. And they put a potato, or we'll just say potato. It might not have been. But they put it inside this little pyramid they built.
Okay.
And they put a control one outside.
Sure.
And left it there. The one outside of the pyramid rotted and got moldy and whatever. The one inside the pyramid did not. Or at least did not to that degree.
Right. So would you say it's safe to say that the one outside the pyramid decomposed much faster?
Yes, very much so.
Okay. All right.
That's my little tangent there.
I wanted to get back to the first rendition of the anatomically modern human with elongated skulls.
Yes.
That had not just longer skulls, but more volume inside their skull, right? So specifically the ones that were found in Peru, the initial thought was that these would be where the First Nations people would have come from, right? And almost every story of the First Nations peoples, regardless of where they come from,
right,
or where they currently reside even, is that, and again, you had mentioned it earlier, life began in essentially the African region, right? And so the thought process was they migrated through the Bering Straits to get to this continent.
Right.
These people, I'll call them fossils, these skulls and skeletons that they found, some of them were so well preserved they still had hair.
Oh, wow.
And the hair the ones that had hair were naturally red. Not like sun bleached, not like they figured out how to dye their hair.
Right.
Like it was genetically red hair, which is not a First Nations people trait.
No, definitely not.
Additionally, the distance they would have had to have traveled to get to Peru through the Bering Strait is, given the age of these things, is just an absurd distance that it's very hard to believe that would have happened.
Right.
This kind of, given that genetic red hair actually originates in the Middle East,
Right.
kind of lends weight that these people, I'll call them first renditions of anatomically modern humans, were seafaring people. They had technology enough to, one, build a boat, and two, navigate the oceans, knowing that there was land there.
Did you ever hear the story? It's a true story, by the way, of this guy. He's in Michigan. He was out fishing the one day. This is I want to say it was in the 70s or the 80s. He's fishing. And it was kind of a dry summer. They had a drought, so water levels were down a little bit.
Okay.
And he's out on this lake, and he's casting from his boat. He's fishing, and all of a
Right.
sudden his boat gets hung up on something. He's in a pretty deep part of the lake. He's
Sure.
thinking, well, what is this, a tree or something like that? I mean, he's in a real deep part of the lake, like dozens of feet.
Yeah.
deep. So he gets his boat unstuck, and he looks, and it looks like there's like stone there.
Okay.
So long story short, he gets somebody from Fish and Game to look into it, It's a pyramid in Michigan with Mayan writing on it. The Mayans were in Mexico, thousands of miles away.
I'm going to come back to the skulls, but
Right.
since you brought that up, I want to point out, since we were talking about our Antarctica moving
Right.
from one space to another, there's a compelling evidence that Antarctica at one point was connected to the Americas because they found stone in the Lake Michigan area that is at a anatomical level exactly the same, minerals and all, to the stones that they found in Antarctica.
Yeah. There's stories like that
Like
everywhere.
100% exact.
I'm gonna get Billy Carson involved one more time. He has this great story. He's very into ancient Egypt, and he went to the Australian outback and met with Aboriginal tribes people there.
Right.
They wanted to take him out in the middle of the outback in the desert to show him this thing that was part of their culture. It was a stone monolith that we wanted to show him.
Sure.
So he said it took them a couple hours to get there. It's out in the middle of nowhere. And out there, when he gets there, he looks at it, and it's been there for thousands of years. And he looks at this thing that these Aboriginal people view as sacred, and it's sandstone with Egyptian hieroglyphics on it. He couldn't take a piece of it or do anything.
Right.
So he took as many clear and close-up photos of it as he could, and he sent it to the Egyptian Bureau of Antiquities.
Okay.
Who they're the people that decide what they have the final word on
Right.
what stuff is historically, and
Sure.
they authenticate everything. And just from his pictures, they said that they have authenticated that big slab of sandstone in the middle of the Australian outback is from ancient Egypt. How did it get there? It's been there for thousands of years. It's once again, where's the explanations? There is none.
I mean, not currently.
No.
There's some really good theories.
Yes.
One of the theories, I'm gonna bring it right back to these elongated skull people.
I keep interrupted you. I'm sorry about that.
No. This works out well, actually. One of the fossils they found that was very well preserved. It was a full skeleton of an 18-month-old baby, elongated skull, strawberry blonde hair.
Nice.
And they DNA tested the fossil, the skeleton,
Right.
the baby, we'll call it. And they found out that I would say, they didn't give me an exact, right? They just said segments. Segments of the DNA are not human. They're not anything that has ever existed to their knowledge on this planet.
Right.
And so there's a running theory that due to the elongated skulls, that they are, I would say, fairly certain, so in the high 90s of certainty, that these are not manipulated skulls. Their skulls were just, when they came into existence, this is what they looked like. They're fairly certain that these were extraterrestrials that started this race.
Once again, tangent, but relative. There is if anybody out there is into ufology, UFOs, UAPs, whatever they're called now, when I was a youngster growing up, Area 51 was a big topic of that.
Still is.
And there's this gentleman who's infamous in the community called Bob Lazar, who he's a physicist who claimed to have worked at Area 51, and he had all these stories and claims, and this Vegas reporter brought him and introduced him to the public and brought his story out there, and the government's done nothing but try to not only discredit him, but basically they wiped out his entire existence. Like, this man was never born. This man never went to MIT.
It's like the Men in Black movie.
Yeah, it kind of is. But anyway, this man said that when the Roswell incident happened, which he said was an absolute real thing. For those who don't know who the Roswell incident is, in 1947, I believe it was, it was alleged that an alien spacecraft crash landed on a farm in Roswell, New Mexico, and a lot of civilians witnessed the wreck, witnessed the crash, witnessed the debris, and even witnessed the dead alien occupants in the craft. And then the United States Army or Air Force, I think it was the Air Force, came, confiscated everything, told everybody it was a weather balloon.
Sure.
And that was the case, okay? But he said that wasn't the case. But he said the aliens that were confiscated from that, we call them the Greys. You know, we see them all on movies and stuff. They have the large heads, the big dark eyes, the small mouths and nose. That their brain, where a human brain has two lobes to it, we have two halves to our brain.
Right.
They had a third lobe, which is why they had to have a bigger skull. That's why their head is so big.
Okay.
To have more volume, it makes sense, because to have more volume in their skulls would mean that they would have maybe an extra lobe maybe in their brain as well, or at least some sort of augmentation
Sure.
to their brain to have more volume, or to have it be necessary to have more volume.
Sure.
And that right there lends credence to it. And yeah, Bob Lazar told us about this a long time ago. So
I got one more point I want to make, and then I'm going to let you run wild with whatever notes you got that you wanted to spit out.
awesome.
So we talked about this before. We talked about it in the last episode. I think we mentioned it 2 or 3 times in this episode. We know that our anatomically modern human DNA was modified around 200,000 years ago.
Yes.
We know that for a fact. The ancient Sumerian text says that essentially around that same time frame, the what's translated to the kingship arrived from the heavens to the earth.
Right.
Not that one is the cause of the other, but I mean, there's a lot of evidence that kind of you could see a correlation there.
Are you saying it's a coincidence?
I feel like it's way more than a coincidence. I don't want to say that we're part alien, but honestly, I feel like if we're not part alien, then there's just no other explanation right now.
You had me way before this. I said it in my, once again, I'm going to keep going back to my Bigfoot video. With that psychic medium channeled from the Sasquatch, and when she asked him, "Who are you and where do you come from?" and he said, "We are terrestrial beings of an extraterrestrial origin, just like humans." I mean, yeah.
If you haven't watched the Bigfoot video, go watch it.
Yeah,
it'll make more sense.
Check it out. It's my story about why I'm interested in my little take on some stuff and how my opinions have changed on it over the years. But it was kind of an impetus because I believe that their story, not to get off on the Bigfoot tangent, but I believe their story is intertwined with ours simply because of the DNA, simply because of
I agree.
The DNA findings that Melba Ketchum found in over 100 samples that were given to her, viable DNA samples, and now they're finding eDNA samples in the woods and stuff like that are being, they have no idea where they're getting primate DNA being found in the woods in like Kentucky.
Oh, one more fun fact that I know is just gonna set you off on a tangent that I forgot to mention. Those elongated skulls,
right?
They have found full skeletons.
Sure.
They're 14 foot tall.
Yeah. Their story about, we should do, you know what, comment on this. There's lots of stories, even in modern history, about giants, giant people. That are very fascinating. I don't know a heck of a lot about it. I've seen a few documentaries on it, but you know what? Give me an excuse to dive deep into it. So if you'd like to see something like that, please comment on our YouTube channel, or
I agree. Or anywhere you're listening to
anywhere
this.
You're listening or viewing this. And once again, thank you, because this has been kind of long, and I
greatly appreciate it.
Yes, very much so. Okay. I am not going to take up too much more of our time. What I'm going to talk about right here is just a couple of little factoids that I find very interesting. Once again, from Billy Carson. Harvard geneticists did this. Now, don't ask me how they did this. I don't know. It wasn't explained. But they took a drop of human DNA, one drop of it, and they were able to somehow download physical information on this one drop of DNA. Okay, so they went, let's download an ebook on there, and they did, no problem. Let's do another one, and another one, and another one. And ultimately, they were able to download, I forget how many millions, it might even be billions, millions of copies of this book in one drop of human DNA. And that's Harvard. They did that, okay? That's a fact. That's a peer-reviewed study. From that study, they were determining that the human body, the current human body, has enough DNA strands to hold on to 13.5 billion years of information. Okay? Now here's where the coincidence occurs. Guess how old we think the universe is? 13.5 billion years. The ancients and the modern spiritual people, the woo people, my people, they have often said that we are the universe and the universe is us. There is no separation. We are all living in complete connection and congruence with each other. Here's some genetic evidence to back up that claim. And I found that very, very, very fascinating.
I agree.
And yeah, I mean, that,
if I can get off on a tangent,
please.
Just to, as an IT person, I can kind of explain to you the way that works.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're a fan of the old school music.
Yeah.
So you're very familiar with how vinyl records are made.
Yes.
It's interpreted pits and lands.
Yes.
Right? When you get into digital data,
Mm-hmm.
It's electrical signals.
Oh,
it's
okay.
either there or it's not.
Oh, fascinating.
How do you download an audiobook to DNA? It's either electrified or it's not.
Okay.
And essentially, it's just, for lack of a better term, ones and zeros. Zeros meaning there's no electricity. Ones meaning there are.
One more story, and this lends credence. Once again, I have a lot of theories myself on stuff. Not that that means anything. I'm not a professor or a scientist in any way, shape, or form. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the human body right now, just for a second. The human body is over 80% water.
Yeah.
We're basically a giant bag of water. And Dr. Yamoto, Japanese doctor, a lot of people have heard of him, know about his experiments. I don't know if you're aware.
I've heard of him before, yeah.
He's the man who showed that you can emotionally charge water, and that water actually has physical memory.
Oh yeah, I remember this one.
And if you want to, I'm not going to get into his experiments he did. They're really fascinating. They're all over the internet. Tons of people have talked about it. He's done it many years ago.
Sure.
But here's an interesting, a couple years ago, a good buddy of mine, like Will had mentioned, I'm a musician, and a good buddy of mine who's also a musician sent me this article. It was from one of the big newspapers. I don't know if it was the New York Times or Washington Post or something. But it was a story about this guy who had a traumatic brain injury, a severe traumatic brain injury, and so much so that he couldn't remember how to talk. He didn't know who he was. Mm-hmm. He didn't know who any of his family members was. He had no memory of anything. He basically just knew how to, like, get up and move around.
Sure.
And he was obviously put in a long-term care facility where people could try to not just help him, but try to help him maybe get his conditions back, some of his abilities back. And one of the things that they did was, this man was a guitar player. And this man couldn't remember how to speak. He couldn't, like I said, he couldn't recall any of his family members. He couldn't even really communicate. Mm-hmm. One of his family members decided that they were gonna, the doctors, with associative issues like this, they'll say bring something familiar in, an object in.
Sure.
And he loved to play guitar. And they said, well, we're gonna bring in one of his guitars and see if that triggers anything. And they brought in an acoustic guitar and they handed it to him, and he looked at it. He had no idea what it was until, everybody's astonishment, he started strumming chords. This is a man that didn't know his own name, didn't know any of his family members, couldn't speak, no cognitive abilities whatsoever, but his body remembered how to do that. My theory, now to this day, they haven't had a medical explanation for that. I mean, muscle memory wouldn't go into play with that because muscle memory is triggered from repetition with your brain.
Right.
Basically, when your cognitive abilities are destroyed, your muscle memories kind of goes with it.
Sure.
But this man, and I believe that the water in his body had that memory. Emoto proved that there is memory in water.
I could completely believe that.
And I believe that that was going on there. But he sent me this, my friend sent me this story, and it was always so compelling to me being a musician that now I know that even if I lose my cognitive abilities, I could still play guitar probably, which brings me great comfort. But it just, once again, I brought it up here today because it illustrates what I have always said. I believe the human animal in its current state, for all of our flaws and all the things that we do that we probably shouldn't, we're still an exceptional creature, and our capabilities are just beginning. We're just beginning to reestablish and understand what we are capable of and what we can do. And I think that when we fully awaken to these capabilities and abilities, man, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. And one of the reasons why Will and I do this, I won't speak for Will, I'll speak for me. One of the reasons I do this is because I want to bring this information forward to people, because I want people to consciously, if we take nothing else from this podcast, I want people to consciously know that you are not only better than you have ever realized, but you are out and out phenomenal. The things that we are capable of, that I believe we're capable of, are astounding. And when we work at it and practice at it and just strive to be not just better people on a physical sense, but better on a metaphysical sense, that's when we'll really find the true origin of our humanity.
I agree with that 100%.
Mm-hmm. So that's all I got.
So on that note, I know we went really long on this one.
Yeah, we did.
We appreciate everybody who certainly stuck around and come back for the next episode of What If Down the Rabbit Hole.
Have a good one, guys.
We've tried our best to provide all perspectives on these topics. If this type of content speaks to you or interests you, please subscribe to get notified when new episodes are released. Check out the show notes for all the references discussed. Do your own research, formulate your own opinion. Join us next time on What If Down the Rabbit Hole.